Guinea-Bissau, country of Western Africa. Situated on the Atlantic coast, the predominantly low-lying country is slightly hilly farther inland. The name Guinea remains a source of debate. It is perhaps a corruption of an Amazigh, Berber, word meaning land of the blacks. The country also uses the name of its capital, Bissau, to distinguish it from Guinea, its neighbor to the east and south. Guinea-Bissau is bounded by Senegal to the north, Guinea to the east and south, and the Atlantic Ocean to the west. It includes the Bijagos, Bisagos, archipelago and other islands that lie off the coast. Almost all of Guinea-Bissau is low-lying and bathed daily by tidal waters that reach as far as 62 miles, 100 kilometers, inland. In the southeastern part of the country, the Footagelan Plateau rises approximately 600 feet, 180 meters. The Bow Hills extend from the western slopes of the Footagelan to the Korabel Basin and the Gabu Plain. The coastal area is demarcated by a dense network of drowned valleys called rias. The Bafata Plateau is drained by the Gaba and Korabel rivers. The Gabu Plain occupies the northeastern portion of the country and is drained by the Kashu and Gaba rivers and their tributaries. The interior plains are part of the southern edge of the Senegal River Basin. The uniform elevation of the mature floodplain allows rivers to meander and renders the area susceptible to flooding during the rainy season. Some eastern portions of Guinea-Bissau form a part of the upper basin of the Gambia River system. Tidal penetration into the interior, facilitated by Guinea-Bissau's flat coastal topography, carries some agricultural advantage. The surge of brackish water can be used to irrigate the extensive drowned rice paddies called bolanas. Anti-colonial warfare had a devastating effect on Guinea-Bissau's soils. Arable land that fell out of use was subject to soil erosion, and, with the destruction of protective riverine dikes, the arability of some soils was compromised by excessive salination. Guinea-Bissau has a generally tropical climate influenced by the Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, a belt of converging trade winds that circles the Earth near the equator. There are two pronounced seasons, the hot, rainy season, which usually lasts from June to November, and the hot, dry season. April and May are the hottest months, and temperatures can reach the high 90s F, mid-30s C. Precipitation does not vary greatly by elevation in Guinea-Bissau, although it does vary between coastal and inland areas. The coast receives some 60 to 120 inches, 1,500 to 3,000 millimeters, of precipitation, whereas the interior is influenced by the tropical savanna climate, with greater variation in precipitation and temperature. Guinea-Bissau's three ecological zones, the tidal estuaries, the heavily forested interior plain, and the savanna, are home to remarkably diverse flora and fauna. Aquatic and riverine birds such as flamingos and pelicans are especially numerous in the coastal swamps, which are also inhabited by a variety of reptiles such as snakes, crocodiles, and sea turtles, the latter of which are endangered. In the plains and forests, lizards, gazelles, antelopes, monkeys, and apes, parrots, hyenas, and leopards abound. Although there was once a substantial elephant population, it has since been virtually eliminated. Many wild animals are hunted for their meat and hides. Guinea-Bissau's population is dominated by more than 20 African ethnicities, including the Balant, one of the largest ethnic groups in the country, the numerous Fulani and their many subgroups, the Diola, the Nalu, the Bijago, the Landuma, the Popul, Pepel, and the Malinke. There is also a small Cape Verdean minority with mixed African, European, Lebanese, and Jewish origins. During the colonial period, the European population consisted mainly of Portuguese but also included some Lebanese, Italian, French, and English groups, as well as members of other nationalities. Notably, there was never a substantial settler population in Guinea-Bissau, as there was in other Portuguese colonies. Among the African languages spoken in Guinea-Bissau, some 20 languages and dialects classified in the Atlantic and Mande branches of Niger-Congo languages predominate. Although Portuguese is the country's official and formal language, It is Criollo, a Creole that emerged during the slave trade that is spoken as the lingua franca and exerts a unifying influence in the rural areas. About 2/5 of the population is Muslim. Among Christians, who make up about 1/5 of the population, Roman Catholicism predominates. About 1/6 of the population practices traditional beliefs, which include ancestor worship, possession, and animism, and are especially prevalent along the coast and in the central regions. Christianity and Islam are enriched with African traditional beliefs, which results in a unique religious syncretism. Saints' days, for example, may be celebrated with drumming, processionals, masques, and traditional dance. Most of the population of Guinea-Bissau live in small villages and the country's several main towns. The population is sparse on the low-lying lands of the coast and in the savanna regions. The majority of Guinea-Bissau's population traditionally lived in rural villages and individual households. From 1963 to 1974, during the armed struggle for independence, about 1/3 of the rural population fled to neighboring countries for refuge. Those who remained tried to restructure their lives in liberated zones, while the colonial military imposed a system of aldeamentos, concentrated settlements designed to isolate the population from the nationalist forces. Although migration to urban centers such as Bissau, Cashew, and Bolima had generally been increasing since independence, much of the urban population fled during the fighting that erupted in the late 1990s. About half of the population is rural. Population growth in Guinea-Bissau is lower than that of the rest of the African continent. Life expectancy for both men and women is well below the African average and substantially lower than the world average, and infant mortality is high. The population of Guinea-Bissau is, on the whole, very young. About 2/5 of the population is under age 15 and about 2/3 under 30. Guinea-Bissau does not have a significant expatriate population living outside the country, except those in the neighboring countries of Guinea and Senegal. Historically, the only traditional pattern of emigration was due to human trafficking. During the 15th through 19th century, thousands of Guineans were exported to Cape Verde and the New World, especially to Cuba and the northern Brazilian states of Grão-Pará and Maranhão, as slaves or indentured servants. The economy of Guinea-Bissau includes a mixture of state-owned and private companies. Plans for industrial development have been reduced, and those supporting agriculture have been increased. The number of state-owned businesses declined significantly after the government adopted a liberal free market economy in 1987, as endorsed by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Guinea-Bissau is easily self-sufficient in food production, and the majority of labor is devoted to agriculture at the subsistence level. Some crops are raised for export. Various small-scale industries and services also generate a part of the gross national product. Because of a variety of damaging factors including an exploitative colonial inheritance, war damage, inflation, debt service, corruption, subsidization, poor planning, civil disorder, and mismanagement, the economy has fallen far short of its promise, resulting in a protracted negative balance of trade and Guinea-Bissau's status as one of the world's poorest countries. Various foreign aid and loan programs have been sought to address this deficit. The economy is largely agricultural, with good prospects for forestry and fishery development. Foods produced for local consumption include rice, vegetables, beans, cassava, manioc, potatoes, palm oil, and peanuts, ground nuts. Livestock includes pigs, goats, sheep, cattle, and poultry. Fish and shrimp, raised for both domestic consumption and export, are also important. Guinea-Bissau is heavily forested, with forest cover on about 3/5 of its land. Most wood harvests are used for domestic fuel, but the country exports small amounts of sawn wood. The export of commercial items such as cashews, palm products, rice, peanuts, timber, and cotton has long played an important role in the country's economy. Large portions of land are not cultivated, because of both the traditional crop rotation practice of slash-and-burn agriculture as well as a lack of agricultural credit and investment due to the political and military conditions. There has not been a comprehensive survey of mineral resources, but large deposits of bauxite in the east along the Guinean border and phosphates in the center and northwest have been found. Offshore petroleum and gold are additional assets that could be developed more fully with improved infrastructure. As a low-lying country with a pronounced rainy season, Guinea-Bissau has plenty of water for subsistence and commercial agriculture and human consumption, although water quality and water delivery systems still need improvement. The Corrible River has immense hydroelectric potential, particularly at the Saltinho Rapids. Manufacturing in Guinea-Bissau is founded chiefly upon artisanal industries such as basketry, blacksmithing, tanning, and tailoring. Only a few small-scale industries exist. These include food processing, brewing, and the processing of cotton, timber, and other goods. Much of Guinea-Bissau's industrial capacity was damaged during the conflict of the late 1990s. A major restructure of Guinea-Bissau's banking system that began in 1989 replaced the National Bank of Guinea-Bissau with separate institutions including a central bank, a commercial bank, and a national credit bank. Guinea-Bissau joined the West African Economic and Monetary Union and the Franc Zone in 1997, and the Guinean peso was eventually replaced by the CFA, Communauté Financière Africaine, franc after the two currencies coexisted for several months. The role of the central bank was taken over by the Central Bank of West African States, which is based in Dakar, Senegal. Participation in the banking system among Guineans is very low, and only a fraction maintain bank accounts. During the colonial period, Portugal was by far Guinea-Bissau's most important trading partner. Although Portugal retained a significant role after independence, Guinea-Bissau also maintains important trade relationships with such countries as Senegal and India. Some 3/4 of the labor force is engaged in agricultural production. Workers are permitted to join labor unions. Of those who are union members, the vast majority are government or parastatal, government-owned enterprise, employees. The majority of the country's tax revenue is earned through tax levied on international trade transactions, income taxes, and general sales taxes. The transportation system in Guinea-Bissau is generally poor because of inadequacies with bridges, connecting services, and maintenance. Some roads in Guinea-Bissau are paved for all-weather use, but most of the country is served by unpaved roadways. Many households and hamlets are accessible only by footpaths and canoes. There are no railways. The airport at Bissau handles international air traffic, while several smaller airports and landing strips serve the inner portions of the country. Shipping and ferry services connect the sea and river ports along the coast with the interior. The country's main port is located at Bissau. Guinea-Bissau's constitution, promulgated in 1984, has been amended several times. Under the constitution, Guinea-Bissau is a republic. Executive power is vested in the president, who serves as the head of state and government, the prime minister, and the council of ministers. The president is popularly elected to serve a 5-year term and governs with the assistance of the prime minister, whom he appoints. The legislative branch of government consists of the unicameral National People's Assembly. Members are popularly elected to 4-year terms. A new constitution was adopted by the National People's Assembly in 2001, but it was not promulgated. The country has experienced several coup attempts, some of which have been successful in toppling the government in place at the time. The most recent military coup took place in November 2025. Guinea-Bissau is divided administratively into regions, and sectors, including the autonomous sector of Bissau. The most basic unit of government is the tabanka, village, or, in towns, the neighborhood committee. During and after the liberation struggle, the neighborhood committee was the basic organizational unit of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, Partido Africano de Independencia de Guinea-Cabo Verde, PAIG, initially the sole legal party for Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. The judicial system is made up of the Supreme Court, regional courts, and sectoral courts. The Supreme Court, which consists of 9 judges, is the final court of appeal. The regional courts hear major cases and serve as the final court of appeal for the sectoral courts, which hear minor civil cases. The continued need for personnel, equipment, and facilities resources such as judges and prisons has challenged the efficacy of the justice sector and has made the country susceptible to organized crime activities including the trafficking of humans, drugs, and weapons. Guinea-Bissau became a multi-party state in 1991. It had previously been a single-party state, led since independence by the PAIC. In addition to the PAIC, other political parties active in the country include the Social Renewal Party, Partido para a Renovação Social, PRS, the United Social Democratic Party, Partido Unido Social Democrata, PUSD, the Electoral Union, União Eleitoral, UE, and the United Popular Alliance, Aliança Popular Unida, APU. The Constitution guarantees the equality of men and women in all aspects of political, economic, social, and cultural life, and a number of women have served as members of the National People's Assembly, as government ministers, and as state secretaries. The country's military capability consists of an army, a navy, an air force, and a paramilitary force, of which the army and the paramilitary are the most substantial. Military service is determined by selective conscription, and individuals are eligible for service from 18 years of age. The healthcare delivery system during the colonial period was grossly inadequate. Healthcare facilities were concentrated in the cities and towns, and the average expenditure per person was extremely low. Most never saw a doctor or dentist. Healthcare services have improved since independence, but the situation is still very poor. Infant mortality rates remain high, in large part because of diarrhea, malnutrition, and upper respiratory infections. Improper sanitation and waste treatment remain significant public health challenges, and much of the population remains undernourished. Tropical diseases, especially malaria, are widespread and entail high rates of mortality. Other health concerns include cholera, schistosomiasis, filariasis, and leprosy. Mortalities resulting from automobile accidents, HIV/AIDS, and substance abuse are increasing. Under favorable circumstances, clinics and dressing stations, first aid centers, operate at the local level with the small hospitals that operate in the larger towns. The main hospital in Bissau routinely faces critical shortages of necessities such as drugs, bandages, anesthetics, antibiotics, and plasma. Family planning, maternal and infant health care, power and water supply, and refrigeration are all rudimentary. Although the number of hospital beds has greatly increased since independence, availability is still vastly short of need. Furthermore, since the number of nurses has not kept pace with the increase in hospital beds, nursing service has actually declined. Officially, 6 years of primary education is compulsory for children age 7 to 14. For those children who show scholastic promise, there are 5 years of secondary education. Amilcar Cabral University and the University of Colinas de Boa, both founded in 2003 and based in Bissau, provide opportunities for higher education. There are also schools for teacher training, nursing, and vocational training. Education during the colonial period was very poor. In the 1970s only a minute proportion of the population was enrolled in primary school, and illiteracy was almost universal. During the War of National Liberation, 1963–74, the PAIC attempted to address this severe problem by establishing its own school system in the liberated zones and in external bases. Nevertheless, education in the context of the war was predictably difficult, and enrollment was inconsistent. Guinea-Bissau's educational system continues to face serious challenges. Only some 2/5 of school-age children attend school, and adult illiteracy remains high, particularly among women. The civil warfare of 1998–99 greatly disturbed a number of services, the educational system among them. Progress in its re-establishment has been slow. There is also a shortage of teaching staff in rural areas in particular, where teachers themselves are frequently not well educated and where the ratio of students to teachers is very high. 5 centuries of the civilizing mission of Portuguese colonialism did not penetrate deeply in Guinea-Bissau, and African culture and traditions are very much in place. These include the intact African languages with their associated folklore, sayings, dances, and music. Cape Verdean music such as funana, a fast-paced genre that features the gaita, an accordion-like instrument, and fanakan, performed by female vocalists, has become increasingly popular in cities and towns. Christian holidays, including Christmas, and Muslim holidays, including Tabaski, also known as Eid al-Adha, marking the culmination of the Hajj rites near Mecca, and Ko-Rite, also known as Eid al-Fitr, marking the end of Ramadan, are observed in Guinea-Bissau. In addition to these, the death of Amilcar Cabral is observed on January 20, Labor Day on May 1, and the anniversary of the Movement of Readjustment on November 14. The government organizes formal expressions of national culture through the National Arts Institute, which maintains a school of music and dance and conducts periodic concerts and folkloric programs. A wide array of traditional music, dance, dress, and handicrafts remain deeply rooted in village and ethnic life. The Museum of Guinea-Bissau and the National Library are located in Bissau. The National Institute of Studies and Research, also located in Bissau, was among the institutions badly damaged during the fighting of 1998–99. With international support, a restoration program began in 2000. There are many traditional African sports in Guinea-Bissau, but wrestling is among the oldest and most popular. A means of martial arts training and a rite of passage, it is common in villages. The African board game of Auri, a forerunner of backgammon, is played throughout the country. Football, soccer, is the most popular Western sport in Guinea-Bissau. The country features several clubs, and since 1986 its football federation has been a member of the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, FIFA. Basketball has also developed a following, and the National Federation is affiliated with the International Basketball Federation. Diving and swimming are popular on the country's islands, and excellent fishing conditions can be found in the rivers and coastal areas. Guinea-Bissau's National Olympic Committee, which was established in 1992, was recognized by the International Olympic Committee in 1995. The country made its Olympic debut at the 1996 Atlanta Games, where it competed in wrestling events. A number of radio stations operate in Guinea-Bissau. There are a limited number of television stations, including one run by the state. A number of newspapers and periodicals are circulated in the country, including the government newspaper No Pincha and Carrillo Bissau, which is distributed weekly. After the overthrow of Pres. Kumba Iola in 2003, media conditions, which had grown repressive, were improved. Lack of financing and power supply are two significant challenges that continue to hinder the growth of Guinea-Bissau's media capabilities. Full independence was achieved by Guinea-Bissau on September 10, 1974, Cape Verde achieved independence the following year. The Cape Verdean revolutionary comrades Luis de Almeida Cabral, half-brother of Amilcar Cabral, and Aristides Pereira became the first presidents of Guinea-Bissau and the Republic of Cape Verde, respectively. João Nino Vieira became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Guinea-Bissau. In August 1978 Vieira assumed the position of Prime Minister in Guinea-Bissau following the accidental death of his predecessor, Francisco Mendes, in July. On November 14, 1980, Vieira led a military coup against Cabral, who was charged with abuse of power and sentenced to death. After negotiations, Cabral was released from that sentence and went into exile. The coup was deeply resented in Cape Verde and severed the military and political unity that had existed between the two countries. The Cape Verdean branch of the PAIC was replaced by the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde, Partido Africano para a Independencia de Cabo Verde, PAICV, which eliminated reference to Guinea-Bissau. With his ascent to power, Vieira faced difficult political and economic problems. Guinea-Bissau's poverty required development aid from Portugal, which was in turn seeking to restore its economic relations with Guinea-Bissau. In addition, the poorly performing state-planned economic policy that had been adopted with independence was increasingly liberalized in subsequent years as attempts were made to improve the economy, but the shift toward a free market economy was not universally embraced and became a source of political unrest. Guinea-Bissau made the transition to a democratic, multi-party system in the early 1990s, and the country's first free legislative and presidential elections were held in 1994. The PAIGC won a majority of legislative seats, while Vieira narrowly won his race. In 1997 Guinea-Bissau joined the West African Economic Monetary Union and the franc zone. However, fiscal volatility caused in part by these actions contributed to political unrest that came to a head in 1998 when Vieira dismissed military chief of staff Brig. Later General, Ansoumana Mane. Almost immediately Mane initiated a revolt that was fueled by widespread frustration and opposition to Vieira. Most observers first thought that the mutineers would tire and Vieira would re-emerge as the victor. Instead, the conflict broadened. Various ceasefires were called and broken, and troops from Guinea, Nigeria, Senegal, and France intervened. After each round of fighting, Vieira became increasingly isolated in Bissau. In May 1999 he was forced to surrender and later went into exile in Portugal. Subsequent elections, deemed free and fair by international observers, brought to power the country's first non-PAIGC government, led by Pres. Kumba Iala. Despite a democratic beginning, Iala's rule became increasingly repressive. Widespread discontent with the deteriorating economic and political climate led to his removal in a bloodless coup in September 2003. Soon after, Henrique Rosa, a businessman and virtual political newcomer, was sworn in as interim president. Under Rosa's transitional government, legislative elections were held in 2004, moving Guinea-Bissau on course toward a stable, constitutional government. While forging political peace, Rosa was faced with the task of rebuilding the country's infrastructure and improving the economy, both severely damaged from the civil war and years of political strife. In March 2005 Iala announced his intention to contest the elections scheduled for June of that year, although both he and Vieira, who had returned from exile in April, had been barred from politics in 2003. Both candidates were subsequently cleared to run for office in April. The following month, Iala announced that he was in fact still president and staged a brief occupation of the presidential building. Defeated in the first round of polling, however, he eventually backed Vieira, who won a second round of elections held in July. Although supporters of the opposition raised allegations of fraud, the elections were declared by international observers to have been free and fair. Ongoing political strife and economic challenges were compounded by drug smuggling, an increasing problem for Guinea-Bissau and other Western African countries in the mid-2000s. With a geography favorable to smuggling and the inability to adequately protect its coastline and airspace, Guinea-Bissau was a particularly desirable target, and individuals in the upper echelons of the government, military, and other sectors were allegedly involved in drug trafficking. Mounting conflict between the military elite and Vieira's administration, fueled in part by ethnic tensions, generated increasing domestic instability, and in November 2008 Vieira survived an attack by mutinous soldiers that was described as an attempted coup. On March 2, 2009, Vieira was assassinated by soldiers who believed he was responsible for the death of the chief of the armed forces, Gen. Batista Tagme Nay, who had been killed in an explosion hours earlier. The military denied any intent to seize power, and, under the terms of the constitution, parliamentary leader Raimundo Pereira was sworn in to serve as interim president until elections could be held. They were eventually scheduled for June 28. On June 5, military authorities killed presidential candidate Bassirou Dabo, former defense minister Helder Proença, former Prime Minister Faustino Mbele, and others, alleging that they were part of a group planning to overthrow the current government. Many senior PAIGC members were also detained as part of the operation to foil the alleged coup. The tension and uncertainty surrounding the alleged coup and the military's response to it did not interfere with the scheduled presidential election, which proceeded as planned on June 28. None of the 11 candidates were able to obtain a majority of votes, so election officials announced that the two front-runners, the Paix Malam Bakay Sanya, who once briefly served as interim president, and former President Kumba Iala, would face each other in a runoff election. In the second round of voting, held on July 26, 2009, Sanya was victorious, receiving more than 3/5 of the vote. Throughout his presidency, Sanya was plagued by poor health and did not initiate much meaningful change in the unstable country. A short-lived military uprising occurred in April 2010, led by the Deputy Chief of Staff, Maj. Gen. Antonio N.J., and former Naval Chief, Rear ADM. José Américo Buobo N.A. Chuto, who had been involved in a previous coup attempt and was one of the country's high-ranking officials allegedly involved in drug trafficking. In October 2010, Sanya surprised many with his decision to reinstate N.A. Chuto as naval chief, a decision that was questioned and criticized by the international community. On December 26, 2011, while Sanya was out of the country for medical reasons, an apparent coup attempt was quickly put down. The alleged mastermind behind the plot was N.A. Chuto. He was one of many people arrested for suspected involvement with the coup. While the aftermath of the attempted coup was still being dealt with, on January 9, 2012, the government announced that Sanya had died in Paris, where he had been undergoing medical treatment. Pereira once again served as interim president until a new president could be elected. In February, Prime Minister Carlos Gomes Jr. stepped down so that he could serve as the Paix presidential candidate in the upcoming election. 9 candidates contested the presidential election, which was held on March 18, 2012. Although the voting process was peaceful and deemed free and fair by international observers, there were some causes for concern, including the murder of Col. Samba Diallo, the former chief of military intelligence, shortly after the polls closed, and accusations of fraud were lodged by several of the candidates, including former President Iala. When results were announced a few days later, Gomes Jr. emerged as the top vote-getter, with 49% of the vote. His nearest challenger was Iala, who garnered 23%. Since Gomes Jr. fell short of winning a majority, a runoff election between him and Iala was scheduled for April 29, although Iala said that he would boycott the second round of voting to protest the alleged fraud that he had previously complained about. Before the runoff election could be held, however, a military coup occurred on April 12, and Gomes Jr., interim President Pereira, and other government officials were arrested. Coup leaders stated that they did not plan on maintaining power and claimed that their action was necessary to prevent foreign aggression in the country and to counter alleged plans to downsize Guinea-Bissau's military. The coup was widely condemned, and the African Union, suspended Guinea-Bissau the next week. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, condemned the coup as well but negotiated with the coup leaders, with the goal of restoring constitutional order to the country. Negotiations did result in Pereira's and Gomes Jr.'s being released and flown out of the country in late April, but talks broke down soon after that. As a result, on April 30, ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Guinea-Bissau and the leaders of the coup. In the following weeks, the coup leaders and ECOWAS managed to reach an agreement regarding the restoration of civilian rule, and on May 11, 2012, the president of Guinea-Bissau's National People's Assembly, Manuel Serafo N'Amadjo, was named president of a transitional government that was intended to restore civilian rule within 1 year. N'Amadjo had finished third in the March presidential election and was asked by military leaders in April to lead a controversial 2-year transitional government, but at the time he refused, denouncing the military's proposal as being illegal. The return to democratically elected civilian rule was stalled, as parliamentary and presidential elections, originally scheduled to take place in 2013, were delayed. When they finally occurred on April 13, 2014, the PAIC made a strong showing. The party won slightly more than half of the legislative seats, and its presidential candidate, former Finance Minister José Mario Vaz, received about 41% of the vote. As Vaz did not secure an outright majority, he and the second-place candidate, independent Nuno Gomes Nabium, who won about 25% of the vote, advanced to a runoff election held on May 18. Vaz again emerged victorious, winning about 62% of the vote. Citing the successful elections, the O lifted its suspension on Guinea-Bissau on June 17, 2014. Vaz was inaugurated as president on June 23, 2014. Vaz's term saw much political turmoil, which included a lengthy power struggle between him and others in the PAIC, more than half a dozen different prime ministers in 5 years, and a parliament unable to act. Parliamentary elections, held in March 2019, saw the PAIC taking more seats than any other party. The first round of the presidential election was held on November 24, 2019. Former Prime Ministers Domingo Simões Pereira, representing the PAIC, and Umaro Sissoko Embalo, representing the Movement for Democratic Alternation Group of 15, Madam G15, opposition party founded by former PAIC members, were the two top vote-getters, taking about 40% and 28% respectively. Vaz, who ran as an independent, won little more than 12%. Pereira and Embalo advanced to a runoff election held on December 29. Embalo was declared the winner with about 54% of the vote, although Pereira and the PAIC voiced allegations of fraud and filed complaints with the Supreme Court. 1, filed on February 26, 2020, was still pending when Embalo held his own inauguration ceremony on February 27. The next day he dismissed Prime Minister Aristides Gomes, replacing him with Nuno Gomes Nabium, who took office on February 29. The legality of Embalo's inauguration, however, was disputed by Pereira and the PAIC because of the pending case with the Supreme Court, and Gomes rejected his dismissal as being unlawful. Meanwhile, the PAIC-dominated parliament, the National People's Assembly, did not recognize Embalo's presidency and on February 28 swore in Cipriano Kisima, the Speaker of Parliament, to serve as interim president. This left the country with two rival administrations and a worsening political crisis. Kisima quickly resigned on March 1, though, saying that his life had been threatened and citing the risk of civil war. Also in March, military troops were deployed to various government offices and public broadcasting stations, which they temporarily occupied while Nabium formed a new cabinet. In September the Supreme Court dismissed the PAIC's petition and upheld the results of the election. The PAIC said it accepted the court's ruling. The political climate was still tense when an attempted coup occurred on February 1, 2022, during which Embalo and his government were reportedly targeted for assassination. Although the coup ultimately failed, 11 people were killed. It was not immediately clear who was behind the attempt, but Embalo stated the Bissau-Guinean military was not involved. Tensions continued after the June 2023 parliamentary elections, in which Embalo's coalition was unable to wrest a majority from the PAIC and its allied parties, raising the likelihood of further standoffs between the president and the legislature. In December, following a clash between military factions, Embalo dissolved National People's Assembly. He justified his action by claiming the skirmish had been an attempted coup, and said fresh elections would need to be held. They were later scheduled for November 2024. The political uncertainty continued later that year when the promised elections were postponed, and it persisted into 2025, when the PAIC and others held that Embalo's term expired in February and did not recognize his legitimacy as president after that point. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that Embalo's term would actually end in September, 5 years after the court had recognized his victory in the contested 2019 election. 2025 elections and military coup. In February 2025 it was announced that both presidential and legislative elections would be held that year in November. Though Embalo had previously stated he would not stand for president, he reversed course and declared his candidacy in March. Pereira was barred from running for president, which further stoked political tensions. He and the PAIC endorsed Fernando Dias of the Party for Social Renewal, and Dias and Embolo emerged as the front-runners from a field of 12 presidential candidates. Alarms were raised in late October when military leadership revealed that several senior officers had been arrested on suspicions of plotting a coup and interrupting the upcoming election, but election day proceeded as planned, with more than 65% of voters heading to the polls on November 23. Pereira and Embolo each claimed victory the next day, though provisional results were not due to be released until November 27. On November 26 the military seized power in a coup. A military spokesperson announced they had uncovered a plot to manipulate the election results, and thus had suspended the electoral process and state institutions. Embolo was arrested, as were Dias and Pereira. The next day, the military announced there would be a one-year transitional period and installed Gen. Horta Enta Na Man as president of the transitional administration. Some in Guinea-Bissau, including Dias, alleged that the coup was actually a ploy by Embolo, working with the military to position himself to remain in power even if he had not won the November poll, and that in the aftermath of the coup, he would call for new elections, in which he would again be a candidate. Thank you for watching this video.